This is the story of the Suzuki GT750. It's a story about doing things differently. It was the first Japanese bike to use water cooling, but it was also the swan song for Suzuki's big two-strokes. In this story, we'll look at all the different versions and what made them different, from the very first GT750 J through to the M from 1975, and finally the B version from 1977. We'll look at what made this big, smoky, wet beast so special and why so many still love it today.
Kawasaki had their 750 triple, just the same as the GT, but it was a snarling, lurching beast of a bike. You know, when you went out for a ride on the H2, you felt like you were having to tame it. When Suzuki brought their 750 to the market, it was an entirely different animal. I mean, this is comfortable, it's civilized, it's great for passengers. You could ride a GT750 all day long, and this sounds absolutely lovely. It's so evocative, it sends hairs up on the back of your neck. To ride, they feel heavy, they are heavy, and it does feel a bit of a lump, but it's comfortable and it's fairly soft. Most bikes were pretty soft at the time anyway, and this is probably softer still. But I like it, it's nice. I'd happily ride this all day, and that's not something that I particularly want to do on an H2 Kawasaki. This is a liquid-cooled bike. They certainly made a big fuss about it on the side of the engine. It wasn't the first by any means. Scott were doing liquid-cooled two-strokes decades and decades before, but it was still pretty special. Apart from, you know, enabling them to control the cooling, that water jacket around the engine quietened down some of the less desirable noises, the piston clatter, and some of the two-strokes sounded like they were about to fly apart at any moment. The liquid cooling gave it a little edge of sophistication.
Sophistication makes sense for a bike where GT really stood for Grand Tourer. It may have been called the Le Mans in the US and Canada, but as an answer to Honda's CB750, the GT750 was a totally different take on the superbike concept. In the late 60s, Suzuki achieved a lot of success with their two-stroke T500 Titan twin, and even after Honda launched their game changer at the end of the decade, they weren't quite ready to give up on two-strokes just yet. On top of that, by adding just one more of the T500 cylinders, they could produce a 750cc superbike without creating an entirely new design. So that's exactly what they did. They sold around 70,000, and many of those sales, in the UK at least, came from the association with Barry Sheene, who famously rode the TR750 race version to victory in the 1973 Formula 750 European Championship. It's one of the most desirable two-strokes of the era and a much-loved classic bike today.
Like everybody, I had faster and faster bikes, and then got a bit older and didn't want to go faster anymore, and decided to get into classic bikes. And the one that I'd always thought looked the prettiest was the GT750, mainly because of all the chrome and the sound. And so it was the very first classic bike I bought. There were 6 different models of the GT750 running from 1971 to 1977. The very first model was the J. This is one of these. Noticeable for a few things. It has colour matched radiator shrouds. It has the exhaust with the black cones at the end. It also has the twin leading drum brake, and it's the only model with the drum brake. And it has these side panels which have these vents which look rather cool, and very, very large badges showing that it was water cooled, which of course was pretty unique at the time. So that was in 1971. That was followed by the K model in 72, which was very, very similar. Only real difference was colours, which were always very big, gaudy, interesting colours. And they moved from the drum brake to twin discs, which was a first at the time. Moving forward, they then moved to the L and the M. This is an M model. Noticeable differences: you've now got the purely chromed exhaust, none of the cones at the back. The side panels have changed to be smooth side panels with nice chrome bits covering the airbox. Very noticeable, you've got a digital gear indicator, which was really quite a radical thing at the time. And you no longer have the colour matched shrouds. And on these you actually had a lockable fuel cap. At the time when petrol was very expensive, everyone was stealing it. This is a B model. This is the very last, 1977 model. And this noticeably looks a lot more styled, a bit like the GT750 of the same time. So it now has a black headlight body. It has also black side panels, no longer colour matched. And the instruments actually had brown faces for the first time. Each year it changed a little bit. They improved it slightly from the M model forwards. They upped the horsepower from 67 to 70, was a few mile an hour faster, and would do about 115 miles an hour at the time. They're quite different to how people would perceive a 750cc two-stroke. People would perceive it as very peaky, very aggressive. But actually when you ride one now, they're a lovely, talky, mild-mannered, cruising sort of bike.
I've never known a bike have so many different nicknames. It seems to be a regional thing wherever you come from, either a water buffalo or water bottle. I have heard people say that they were known as a kettle over here, particularly because they used to boil up and steam like a kettle. But to be honest with you, I didn't have them in the day, but I can't imagine they ever did when they were new. But subsequently, I've had quite a lot of these GT750s, and I've never had one that's had any heating problems. So I really don't know quite whether that was true or not about the overheating. It's not in my book.
When it came out, it was a real superbike. It was very fast. It was directly comparable and at the same time as the CB754, which was the first superbike. It then got a bit superseded by things like the Z1 and subsequently right at the end of the 70s by the CBX. So by the end, I don't think it was. It was more of a sort of heavyweight cruiser. Certainly at the start it was a real superbike, and I think, you know, it has a unique place in the history of 1970s Japanese motorcycles.
I consider this a superbike. I mean, a 750, 750 triple two-stroke. That's, that's a superbike in my book.
Superbike or super cruiser, the GT750 could be anything you wanted it to be. And you can hear and smell one from a mile away.